to the Curate for Women Network. We are here today with Dr. LaKeitha Poole, one of my favorite people in Earth. And guess what? We are also on episode 10. Can you believe that we have already made it to episode 10?
I know, and I can't believe I get to be episode 10.
I know. I remember, guys, that I was actually talking about Curate and like wanting to turn into a network and wanting to like interview women and kind of humanize them and their careers. And we were literally talking about that in your office a year ago, and we have already made it to episode 10.
Which is crazy.
And we just realized today that we were on episode 10.
On the spot. Right.
I love it. I love it.
I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this with me today. I want to start this episode by asking you your thoughts about a word. So as a therapist, tell me what you think about the word courage. What comes to mind when you hear the word courage?
For me, I think being able to be fearless in spite of circumstance. So I think a lot of times people think being courageous means that you aren't fearless, but I think it takes a lot of courage to actually admit to being afraid and still moving forward to do anything. So courage is just the ability to act, like to still be able to not be completely, structured or perfect in your approach, but to be able to just do it anyway.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so for people that, first of all, I'm going to ask you that again, like off camera, because I want to write that down. Okay. What you just said, because that was really good. But for people who are watching that does not know who you are, first I want you to tell me what you do, and then we'll like kind of jump into your career and all like the superstar stuff.
Oh, pressure.
Yes.
Well, I'm Dr. LaKeitha Poole, and I'm a New Orleans native. I always start with that before talking about my career, but I'm a licensed professional counselor, an adjunct instructor, and I have a private practice for mental health. That career has taken me all over the place. I know we're going to get into it a little bit, but being a therapist is the core of who I am every single day.
So at LSU, you have a very specific niche. You are now, tell me your title at LSU.
So my newest title, almost a year old, is Assistant Athletic Director for Sports Psychology and Counseling. And that it's just what it sounds like. Like we literally cater to the needs of our student athletes on their mental health, their emotional health, and their performance.
Oh my goodness. That is, first of all, I think that's probably very necessary. I know that a lot of people probably even think, people who are concerned about the kids and what they deal with mentally, I know that that's probably a question that they have, like, do they go to therapy? Are they required to go to therapy? But I thought it was interesting the other day, you and I were having a conversation and you were like, what's crazy? I was going to this conference and I learned at the conference, you learned at the conference that you were the first Black director in the SEC. What does that mean to you?
It's weird, I didn't know. I literally was asked to be on a panel for the NCAA Inclusion Summit, which makes sense. I mean, there were some context clues there, right, as a woman of color and a woman in sport, but I just assumed that was the reason. Yeah. And during introductions, they just said this. They were just like, and we also have Dr. LaKeitha Poole here from LSU, who at that time my title was Director of Student Athlete Mental Health for Athletics. And I was the first Black female, I think Black male or female, director of a sports psychology and mental performance area in the SEC.
That is bananas. Weird. First of all, we are in the year
2023.
2023. But also for people who don't know you, they're probably looking at you like, girl, you like 22 years old. How are you that?
I hope I look like that forever.
You really do. You look great. But you've had such a lengthy career in what you're doing. particularly at LSU.
LSU.
And so what schools did you go to? Like your undergrad is from an HBCU, right?
Florida State.
Florida State. That's not an HBCU? Look at me trying to make them
It's okay.
FAMU.
I was like, nah, I hung out at FAMU a lot because it was down the street.
Okay, that's like people who go to LSU and hang out a lot at Southern.
Yep,
right, okay.
Same thing.
Okay, so, educational background.
Okay, the rundown.
Yes.
So I went to Florida State for undergrad, majored in psychology there, and minored in family studies because I thought I was going to be a marriage and family therapist. We can save that for later in our Curate conversation because clearly I'm not just that. Yeah. Came back to Louisiana, moved back in 2010, and also started graduate school for clinical mental health whilst I started my career working at LSU then also. And so did my master's degree, thought I was going to be in Baton Rouge for 2 years. It's clearly, you just said it's 2023. And I said I moved here in 2010. And I haven't left since. And so finished school there, started worked for 6 years in the Office of Multicultural Affairs on campus at LSU. I was their in-house clinician there as well as assistant director for multicultural affairs. And so I ran the African American Cultural Center that a lot of folks visit on campus now. The newest one is the one I got to cut the ribbon on that, so I'll never forget that. And so I honestly thought I was going to just stay in that space of mental health, working with college age students, working with diverse populations. And then decided, okay, now I'm ready to go back to school one more time because I knew I wanted to teach as well. I didn't have a lot of professors that looked like me.
Okay, so you know that you wanted to teach on a collegiate level. Okay.
And so particularly mental health and counseling. Okay. And so I knew there weren't a lot of people who looked like me that would be able to convince people like me to go into those programs, to enter that field. So in order to do that, because I didn't have to, having a master's, you can get licensed with, a clinical mental health degree or a social work degree at that level, and I could have stopped. But in order to teach, you have to go back and get the PhD. So in 2013, I started my PhD. I attended Regent University, which is in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So I had to do residencies there, come back here. It was very interesting experience. But I was grateful because I got to keep working while, continue my education and finish that degree in 2016. And honestly, that same year was just a big year. So I finished school, was working still, and then the opportunity to move over and do mental health and athletics came up. So that's the same year. I also moved from student affairs into athletics in 2016.
Oh, I have so many questions. Okay, so when you were offered the opportunity to work within the sports realm, were you thinking what were you thinking? Were you thinking no, I'm not an athlete anymore because I know that you do have a history in sports, or were you like, oh my gosh, this is perfect because when I was an athlete, I needed this?
I think it was probably a bit of both. I kind of brushed it off in the sense that I'm going to be their mental health practitioner. So students are students in that space. And at that time, I was just super passionate. I still am, but super passionate about working with college age students. And so I just was like, well, this is a new, unique group that still lets me cater to the needs of diverse groups. We got athletes from all over the world. So their backgrounds will always come up in therapy. And I was like, well, this will just be a nice, smooth transition. But of course, there is that part of me that was, I always say a failed volleyball and track athlete from elementary school through high school. And I stopped in high school. That was also intrigued by what would it have looked like had I had someone maybe who was doing what I was going into that particular role to do. Maybe I wouldn't have stopped sport, or maybe I would have had a different even path around how I envisioned sport fitting into my life. Because by the time I stopped, I just was like, all right, well, sports is done for you. So the job definitely came as more of a surprise, but once I knew that it was something that was available for somebody in my field to do related to mental health, I was all in for it because I also knew I understood athletes.
And so you're from New Orleans. What part of New Orleans are you?
So I grew up in the lower Ninth Ward. It's my favorite.
You from
thing
New
to
Orleans?
Say. I'm from,
New Orleans.
I am from
from
across the
Nolans.
canal, right? From across the canal is what we say. And I stayed there until I was maybe 12 years old, and then we moved to people don't say the upper ninth ward, but just the ninth ward when I was like 13 and stayed there till Katrina.
Very much so from New Orleans, meaning culture.
Yes.
My
zip code.
Yeah. So when you told your family, because this is very taboo in the Black community, when you told them that you were going to school for to be a mental health professional, what did they think?
I still don't know if some of them know what to think. Yeah, I still don't, 12 years in.
Do they know what it is?
I think they have a better understanding, but no, I honestly, I think even when I think of some of the questions I get now, particularly because of working in sport and mental health, and I think people think I'm in the gym shooting with the students or that sort of thing, and I don't know that any of them really understood it, but I'm fortunate. I think I've always had a supportive family that, allowed me to do anything, try anything. I think that's how I ended up in a field like this, because I didn't know anyone prior to myself being in this field, and my family or friends. So I think it really has been helpful that I just, my mom let me do anything. I did band, I did sports, I did dance, so I think it was kind of one of those things they were just well, there's LaKeitha going, trying something else
that she likes.
We don't understand it, but we know she'll figure it out.
Yeah,
and I just think
that's
1,000%. And that's been the helpful part, because even today when they don't get it, having people in my family see our teams win or those sort of things, they at least know well, she's in the midst of that somehow.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about that. How long have you been at LSU?
I've been at LSU for 13 years.
And how long have you been in this particular
in athletics
position?
For 7.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you have counseled our favorite athletes.
Probably.
Yes.
Or at least your favorite teams as a collective. Yeah.
So what do you think, in your opinion, as far as student athletes, what do you think that they need the most mentally?
I think the acknowledgement that they're people outside of being athletes. So we talk a lot with athletes all the time about identity development and the role that identity plays in you as a person, not only being able to go out and do what you do athletically, but also, well, what happens when this ends? Because it does end. All of our careers are set up like that. There is an end point. And so I just think that's probably a key piece that people don't spend a lot of time on, or why it takes unique people in the space of sport counseling and sports psychology to be able to do these types of jobs, because we're going to always, or at least I do, I know probably some of my athletes hate it, but I always am reminding them of who are you? Where are you from? Who are you doing this for?
Right. Because do you think that they forget that they're human?
I think, especially certain environments.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you think about big schools that they're driving through the city they go to college in, and their face is on a billboard,
and probably
as they're
never experienced anything like that ever in life.
That would freak me out.
And so what do you say because when you are in a position like that, where you're driving through a new city, a city that you either did or did not grow up in, and your faces are plastered all over these billboards, there's this expectation for you to become a professional athlete, and then what advice do you give them in the event that they don't?
Yeah, which happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
The percentage of people going pro is very, very small, even depending on sport. And then some sports don't have a pro level. The one I always give as an example is gymnastics, right? If they're not competing right now for, with Team USA in tandem with them being a collegiate athlete, that's it. When the lights go down, that's it. So a lot of times, I think I hope that in my experience with them, that I'm trying to help them normalize what it means to be an individual who plays a sport, but not that the sport is who you are.
Right.
Because that is, you ride a high of riding, like we just said, riding around the city. You see billboards, you have, you walk into different restaurants, the poster of your team is in, the pizza joint.
Pretty much every restaurant
everywhere.
Here. And then also now there's this whole NIL situation.
Yeah, that's a whole added layer.
So in my opinion, I think that the students absolutely deserve to have this whole NIL thing, because now it's this out in the public. We're not using you, right? You are fully paid for what we're asking you to do, essentially, right? But then there's also a part of this that is well, you are not a professional athlete, and if you don't go pro at some point, this will come to an end. Do you think that that's like a dangerous space to be if they don't necessarily have like a big ally behind them or an advocate or a big supporter, like keeping them grounded while they're in this space?
Yeah, I mean, because with NIL, we're now asking them to become entrepreneurs, basically, whether they wanted to or not, if they want to go into the space. And so you have to allow room for them to learn. You know, most schools are creating like collectives and things like that so that there are funds funneling in, because you got to think about certain teams that there's a star player and then there's the rest of the team.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean those kids aren't stars, but they may not be getting the offer from the restaurants or the boutiques around town.
Right.
And then they definitely aren't getting like the major label, the Nikes, the, you know, the cars and all those things. And so you have to be able to help them to see like, well, where do you want to take this? Because it really is, it's a great opportunity to earn some money while you're in school, knowing that they can't have jobs outside of their sport and stuff like that. But it's hard because for the most part, I mean, I think about my own career, like where would I have been had I not had people to lean on to say like, here's how you save, here's how you invest. Here's, you know, and I'm still learning that.
Athletes struggle with even learning how to
do that.
And they're grown-ups, essentially.
Yeah. And
these are legit children.
And especially if you've come from a background that like money wasn't, you know, in excess anyway. So
oh my gosh, so then you think about like families and
for
people
the
who are now
first time
dependent
ever.
on
That's right.
college students. And so you actually made a good point when you were like, well, now they're having to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And so it's like, well, I'm now a student, an entrepreneur, and an athlete. Thank God for people like you.
I hope so. I hope they feel that way.
Seriously,
it's hard.
Space.
It's hard.
Okay, so let's move a bit further.
Okay.
So when I met you, you were the sports psychologist for the Warriors.
I was contracted with them that year for sports psychology.
Oh my, that had to be like a super surreal experience.
It was almost outer body. to be honest, I'm a basketball fan in general, so I actually really love pro basketball, collegiate football. I always like point that out to people. So
same.
Versus like, I don't know, it's just different. But that was outer body, like being, you know, going for that job, that contract, and getting interviewed by Steve Kerr and like that staff.
Did you have like, first of all, how did you even find out about this position?
So my village of like women who work in sport. I have a couple group texts, but group texts with my girls who work in this industry. She used to have what I have now as my role at LSU. She had that role at USC. And during COVID, she ended up taking a job with the New York Giants and moving obviously cross country. And so someone reached out to her because the Warriors are in San Francisco in California. And so they reached out and was just like, hey, you know, they're looking for somebody to bring on for the year, like a contract, just to see how it goes. They're trying to formulate their mental health program. Are you willing, or do you know someone? And she had just moved. So she was like, no. She's like, but is there travel? How does it work? So she got the details, and they basically like, oh, no, it would definitely be like travel. They don't have to move yet or anything like that. And she's like, I know the perfect person. So she calls me. And she's like, I got this opportunity. I'm telling you about it. And I'm like, cool. And she hadn't told me which team. She just was saying, she's like, it's a professional gig, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay. I mean, it sounds great. Like,
when you found out, were you like, holy?
I was driving. So I literally I was in the car driving, and I was like, wait, say that again? And so she was like, yeah, and I just wanted to see if I could give them your number. And I was like, next time, don't ever, just give it to them. Don't call me.
Oh, there was like no period of like imposter syndrome. You
in
were
that
like,
moment,
girl, do not just give it to me.
I think the imposter syndrome might have come later when it was time to go make my first trip. But like in the moment of just doing the interview, I was like, no, girl, give them my number. Please. And so she did. And I think they reached out maybe that same like afternoon. We got our interview set up. Coach Kerr had just left to go to the Olympics, so we had to wait for him because he was in, I think that's when it was in Tokyo. And so the time, we had to figure out time. It was like 8 p.m. his time when we finally did it, and all the staff was on there. It was a really great experience, both interviewing, particularly as a woman,
Right.
and then the experience itself, the season, I mean, it ended pretty well, right? Like, I can't deny that part, but even the experience before, how we knew it might not end.
Yeah.
Just being
But
in that
just
space.
so y'all know, they literally won.
Yeah, they won. They're the current champs.
They were the champion. They are the champions.
They are the champions right now.
And I always tell people it's because of her. I don't know what the
I think
coaches
everybody,
do.
my mom tells people that all the time.
Like, I don't know what the coaches are responsible for. I don't know what the trainers
The
are
players,
responsible for. I don't even know the players out there playing because she was in the head. It's like that show. What's that show? This is ghetto. It's like the show, The Fifth Man.
Oh, yeah.
Or was it The Sixth Man?
The Sixth Man.
The Sixth Man, when, you got the individual person, the ghost
Like
playing
behind
for you.
there, behind the scenes, the puppeteer.
That was you.
Yeah.
That was you. I was literally telling all the people, like,
I think
winning 'cause-
everybody did. Everybody did.
Yeah.
Which, I
Okay,
mean,
so when
was
you got
exciting.
the call that you're hired, what did you do?
I definitely remember like physically dancing in my kitchen.
I wish you could show me the dance.
Probably like
We
some
gotta-
weird something, who knows? But just
Yeah.
like super excited because I was like, is this real?
Yeah.
And so then just started to prepare, like to figure out, because I also was like, man, this is a huge opportunity. And
Right.
I've had smaller like contract opportunities in pro spaces before, usually like around education, like of staff and stuff like that. This was like my first pro team that I would get for a whole season.
Yeah.
So a little pressure. So that's what I mean. Like the imposter syndrome probably came closer to time to go,
Yeah.
hoping that I would do a good job.
Did you have to treat this very different from the student athletes, or are they kind of battling some of the same challenges?
It's a lot of the same challenges because it's all tied to that sort of athlete identity.
Yeah.
The difference is, just like we were talking about with, the NIL and the responsibility of being a student athlete, these
Right.
folks just come to work and do their
Like, this is
thing
their
as an
job.
athlete. That's
Yeah.
their job. They're doing this to care for their families.
Yeah.
And so there's not different in the sense of one being bigger than the other, but a different level of pressure to sort
Yeah.
of come in, be the best, try to make it through this like incredibly long season. You're playing over 100 games. Like that's a lot compared to, in the collegiate space, which is
Yeah.
just as hard, but it just looks different. And so you're preparing them for stuff that you wouldn't even imagine, because in between that there's road travel, there's all-star games, there's, all these other parts that, collegiate athletes don't have. So
And so this team is like star-studded. And I know that obviously we can't say these people's names, but were you ever in a session like, I am really doing this? Like, I'm really talking to this person right now.
I don't think in the sessions, it would be my flights back home, like coming back from San Francisco, because I went once a month for about a week for 9 months. And so, yeah, I would definitely have those moments and on the flight home, or when I would wrap up for the day. Like I literally was like part of the staff. So I had an access card to get in, to go into the weight room and, be there. And so there were days where I'm literally leaving, like I would be leaving from LSU at the end of the day with my backpack and my water bottle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did I just actually have a session with these particular, folks?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. But great.
But then also having to get back on the flight and come back to LSU, like, oh my God. No shade to LSU,
but
because
it's like,
because LSU is still, to a lot of people,
yes,
LSU might as well be a professional
Totally,
sport,
especially here in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, these kids are famous.
Yes,
at
this
point.
is like as high profile as it gets for sure in Baton Rouge as well.
But you leaving the Warriors and coming back to work, like.
There are plenty of days where I would be like, San Francisco's nice. Like I could
totally
maybe figure
live
this
here.
out if they decide they want, a full-time person. Like it may be an opportunity.
Yeah, and maybe at some point they will get
Yeah,
there.
you never
that
know.
would be so amazing.
That would be amazing. As both a fan and someone who, loves what I do, it would be great.
And just continue to excel in this space. I'm sure at some point you'll be able to write a book about this.
I hope so.
Let's reverse. Let's talk about your childhood, because I think that to be in this position, you have to definitely, and I'm not saying that every therapist is very emotionally intelligent, right? Because a lot of this is just book smarts, and, and you are able to get through a lot of these curriculums. But to be able to work at the level in which you've worked, and still have this level of integrity that you have, that didn't just start as you became a professional.
Right.
So you and your mom, y'all have a very beautiful relationship. Has it always been that way?
Yeah, that's my girl. Like, we have always been super close, and part of that is just probably because, so she was a single mom.
Yeah.
Her and my grandmother really raised me. So it was the three of us. We were the three musketeers, literally.
Were you raised around your dad at all?
My dad lives in New Orleans, so I have a relationship with him, but he wasn't. I don't consider a huge part of like my rearing.
Yeah.
Just because he had his own life things going on. But those two ladies, the girls. But my mom, even to this day, like, that's just, I talk to her every day. That's my girl.
Your mom is definitely your best friend.
She is. She's a character, though.
And she also lets everybody know that she is your best friend. And so as you were growing up and everything that you wanted to do and everything that you participated in, do you feel like your mom was emotionally intelligent enough to kind of free you in a space to let you do whatever it is that you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been asked that in that way, but I definitely think that's what it is. I think it's the fact that she somehow had developed her own, mental capacity to raise a child on her own, that she also didn't raise me out of fear, which a lot of parents do, even when they're not single parents. And she lived in a space where she just let me try things. But she also, there were boundaries. There was discipline as a part of that. When I had stuff I wanted to quit, she's like, okay, you don't have to do this anymore, but you do have to finish this season, or you do have to finish this year.
Don't you appreciate that now?
Oh, absolutely, because I think it's why I'm disciplined now. So there's things that I'll get into and I'm like, ugh, I should not have volunteered for this, but I'm like, but I'm going to finish it because I gave my word. And so I think I just learned those things from her, just, more character traits probably than anything. And you always have to kind of respect somebody who lives how they teach you. And she's always done that.
And I feel like it's easier to respect somebody when they're not just telling you what to do versus actually
doing it and being it.
Right. And so right now, you are a pretty independent person. You are dating. Well, you're not dating. You actually got a man. She got a man. Sorry. And we'll get into that later. But you are very independent. Is that because of how you grew up? Is that because you come from like two very strong independent women?
I think so.
Was your mom like I don't need no man?
It was an interesting balance. Like, I definitely feel like if she had found someone or someone had come into her life, I think she would have been open to it. Because I think that's helped me too in as an adult to not look at dating when I've had disappointments in dating and not let it completely shut me out from it. But I mean, yes, she was super independent. My grandmother, she became a widow young, very young. And so I think it was funny because that's how I feel like the three of us ended up in the house together. And it was just like life had handed them scenarios and they just tried to figure it out and were tough through it. But also, I'm sure, because we all have had moments of, not necessarily regret, but just wishing things maybe could have been different. I appreciate that they didn't place that on me, like emotionally, and let me be a kid and let me grow.
Well, good, because I was going to ask you, like, choosing this as a profession usually comes from a place of either needing this desperately as a child or being placed in those positions as a child to be that for your family and for your friends. And so that was not necessarily your position, but do you feel like because of your mom and because of how your grandmother was, it really placed you in a place to be so solid that you could do this? Yeah,
I think it takes a very unique person. I probably think of myself as weird, right? Like being kind of always willing to talk about emotions and that sort of thing. But I think they set me up in a way to be equipped to do it, not because of like negative experiences. I think if anything, whenever I tell the story of like why I got into mental health, really had more to do with environment. So, you know, I'm always quick to shout out New Orleans, but like Hurricane Katrina for me was really the turning point. That's when I decided to major in psychology at Florida State.
This is when you stopped doing sports.
And sports stopped for me as well. So it was almost like a, you know, kind of a God moment sometimes where life hands you something and it's what are you going to do with it? And I remember watching my mom and my grandmother go through that experience. My mom turned into just like a cooking machine. She already cooked, but that was her coping. And my grandmother, who was already quiet, she and I are much more alike in demeanor, was even more, I feel like, withdrawn and internalized. And there wasn't a place for them to process that because at that time still, like mental health wasn't
taboo.
This thing to talk through. It was still taboo. And so, again, whether that was like a form of, you know, coping for me to watch them and learn, somewhere in there when I finally got back to finish my senior year of high school, because that's when Katrina happened, I had the option to take a psychology elective. And in taking that class, I learned all these like theories and definitions, and it made what I had experienced for the 5 months prior from when Katrina happened to January of that next year make a little more sense. And I was like,
did you have like a lot of aha moments?
Oh yeah, 100%. I still do have that when I'm learning stuff or when I'm sitting with a client and working through an issue with them. There are moments where I'm like, oh, well, this is also why maybe I went through this to have this perspective. Because I think, like I said, it takes a unique person to be a clinician, and it takes, I'm not going to shade other clinicians, but I think it takes a unique person to do this in a way where you still show up as yourself.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Because another thing that I was going to tell you is that there's no gray area with a therapist, at least not for me. I either meet people who are therapists and I trust them, or I absolutely do not. Which I think is why it's probably so hard for people to find a therapist, because 9 times out of 10, the first therapist that you see won't actually be the one that you stick with.
That's right.
And so for people who already have this kind of shaded point of view of what therapy is, that could be a huge turnoff. And so how do you advise people who are in those spaces where they're looking for a therapist and they can't necessarily know, like, how do I pin down the right therapist?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to find your comfort in asking for what you want, which sometimes is the problem, right? Sometimes that's the reason somebody needs therapy, because they struggle with speaking up for themselves. But I think to an extent, like being able to know that as a good clinician is never going to be upset about you questioning like their modality or their style or the types of clients that they're really good at working with, like their success stories. And people should feel comfortable asking that. It's also okay to, like, you know, we love the internet now. Like, do your research, like see what you really can find out about your clinician, and then call them up. You know, most therapists are okay with like a 15-minute consult just to see if y'all click over the phone. And then the other piece is, if you go for that first session and it doesn't go the way you want, or they're not who you thought you would connect with, it is also okay to try again.
Was it hard for you to watch how your grandmother and your mom process their grief after Katrina?
It was a challenge, because I'd never seen, again, I consider myself pretty fortunate and grew up in a happy household. We didn't have much, but like, I didn't know that, I had no clue. But I think the fact that then I saw sort of what felt like a little bit of shadows of these two women in different ways. Like I said, my mom dove into just becoming like the caretaker of everybody. We were in my grandmother's hometown, Bayagula, Louisiana, which is
Bayou what?
Bayagula.
Is this where you started eating potted meat? And
probably, and my I love it. And my Vienna sausage. I started eating it before that though. But and so this is like complete shift for me as a city kid, right? And I am a city kid. And so we're in Bayagula. It's off of Highway 1. The street is one street. Most of the street is all family connected somehow. They didn't have like internet, like just things that
Not even the dial-up with the ugly
we had to
noises.
get it so that I could do my homework. My mom had to figure out how to get folks out there for us to get it.
You know, it's so crazy. I'm sitting here like, wow. But I remember life
right,
with
it was
no
like
internet.
2005, right?
Yeah,
and it's just like, but for us, I mean, we are the generation. We've seen a lot, so we can't even be mad about that. But
I feel like we've kind of lived through
every era.
like every era.
We have. We've seen it. We should
the
all
stone
feel
ages of like
traumatized.
before cell phones. Okay, we'll get into that because like literally before I'm watching the show and I'm like, they had those big cell phones and I remember having the not purse. I was a baby,
but seeing people with those
in car phones. Remember that?
Our beepers.
Okay,
so that's a whole
so,
thing.
Anyways, saying all that to say, my to no internet is like it's childish.
It's okay, but it feels like a long time ago too.
It does.
A lot's happened since then. But so I mean, I think that was a huge shift for both of them in their. My mom she is still a teacher, so I think just the loss of like that identity, just like we were talking about with athletes, it's the same thing. Like when something abruptly changes your path, your life path, you don't know how you're going to respond always until it happens.
Yep.
And something like that where we lost everything. So it wasn't like, we were in certain parts of the city where things were saved, and it was like, no, we started at 17 years old. I started my life from scratch. And so I think being able to know that they, as much as they had worked hard and done all these things, nothing that they could have done could have saved us from a natural disaster. And so the fact that they both still put their best effort out there, they still were super great in helping to raise me, but I definitely could see there were different moments where like, the light in their eyes was not as bright, the emotional toll of trying to make sure I had what I needed. So it was my senior year of high school too.
And then probably still the pressure of trying to keep you happy. Because your whole life they've been successful.
I'm living in the middle of nowhere. And that was not me. And I was miserable. My friends, I didn't know where some of them were, if they were okay. We were all over the world at that point. So kudos to them. And at that point, I'm much more like calmer demeanor and stuff now, but I know myself at 17, I was a little bit more emotionally expressive. And so I remember days crying, getting ready to go to I had started a new school, things that I, hated. So. And
so too, city education is way different from these country schools. We talk about what urban communities lack, but what about these rural areas that girl, how do y'all even learn biology? Where do you even get a biology teacher in, what's the name of this town?
This was Bayou-Gula, Louisiana.
Girl, where you learn biology in Bayou-Gula without the internet? An encyclopedia, maybe.
I know, all the things. Well, so there wasn't even a school in Bayou-Gula. I had to go to school.
See what I mean?
I know. As soon as you said that, I was like, wait till she hears this. So I had to go to school in Plaquemine, Louisiana, which more people probably around Baton Rouge know Plaquemine a little bit. It's a little bigger. I went to St. John.
Still the middle of nowhere.
Still middle of nowhere. I think it was 5 of us from New Orleans. None of us went to the same school. Maybe 2 girls did.
How far was that away from
Bayou-Gula?
Yeah.
It's like a 15-20 minute drive. Literally just driving up Highway 1, nothing else to see. Just
a stoplight.
Just a stoplight,
and
literally a train track, and that was it. And so 5 of us from New Orleans ended up at this school randomly, right?
Cool.
I knew one girl was actually there from my high school who I had known a long time. She and her family were living in Baker, and so they would drive from Baker to there.
You mean to tell me that these people were passing up Scotlandville and Baker High School? They could pass up. I'm just playing. But did you ever feel with your mom, you gonna put me at you just take me a little bit further and I could be back in the city.
Go to Baton Rouge, right? Or even I know. At that time, I trusted her. I still do. So I think
you were
that's
not
part
that
of it.
kid.
I was not that kid.
I was so that kid.
I didn't want to go to school anywhere else. So at that point, didn't even matter.
Oh, gotcha. Baton Rouge wouldn't have even been good enough.
I would have still just been the same way, I think.
Yeah.
It wasn't even because it was still in a small town or anything. I was just I want to go back to my school.
I got you.
But
all right, because we could stay on this forever and ever, but I'm okay, so you grew up very different than the life that you live now, obviously. Are there any things right now that you are still trying to release while you're trying to become this woman that you are to be to also become the woman that you want to be.
Yeah.
And what are those things? What does that look like?
I know you and I've talked a lot about like my thoughts about hyper independence, and you know, I love being independent. I love being, you know, a go-getter, motivated, all that, you know, but I think there's a level of, because of what I know as a clinician and the connection that human beings have, that you need to be connected to other people.
Yeah.
And so I think I've spent, which now, like, I'm in my mid-30s now. So I feel like my 30s is really where I've learned so much about friendships and relationships in ways that either I didn't give enough focus to because I was so focused on school and career building that now,
Because you're a doctor and you're 12.
and I'm 12. And so it's like at some points I had to, you know, have some reality checks with myself to be like, well, yeah, you want to have all these accomplishments and you got the championships with teams and you got all this stuff, but you know, who do you share that with? Or you know, I want to be a parent one day too. So it's like being able to know that if I don't explore those parts of myself and not let my desire to be independent feel like it has to conflict with also my ability to be able to connect with other people. And I think sometimes people feel like you either can't have both or that it looks a certain way. Because I definitely have the mentality of like, because of how I grew up, I'm like, I'm not going back. You know, there's a layer to that. But I also try not to like even say that in a way where I feel ungrateful for having that experience, but I recognize what part it plays in who I am now.
And so as you try to release this whole like independent woman, well, you never want to lose that part of yourself. But as a therapist, you are gathering so much of people's like emotions and their feelings and their heaviness. And so you have a therapist, obviously, that you see as well, which we'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, most people come home and they talk about work. Is that a thing for you?
No. Like
And so my point to asking that is like, there's also that level of independence that I do this so much that I don't have to dump on you. And to be quite honest, I don't even have the capacity to dump on you. Yeah.
And it's important to have people in your life who understand and respect that. I definitely, you know, am able to like share with family and friends, like, I'm like, y'all, there's this crazy story around this thing that I've never seen before clinically, and like, it either has me confused or, you know, I found humor in it. But
this is why therapists write the best books.
Because, I mean, we hear a lot of stuff that we can't make up. And so, I mean, I think having people in your life who understand that, and who also understand that because of being a therapist, I'm super boundaried in the sense that there's not a lot of back and forth with me. If there's conflict between myself and someone else, then it's like, here's where we are. We can surely talk it through. I'm totally open to that, but to also know that my boundary is this, and I'm telling it to you so that you can stay in my life. I'm actually putting the boundary in so that you get to stay.
Do you lose a lot of friendships because of that?
I don't think lose, but they evolve a lot.
Yeah.
The older I've gotten. When I first started as a clinician, I don't think people, like, we laughed about it, but I don't think people took me as seriously. Like, oh, we don't know what this is. Like, whatever. And so I don't think that friends and family got it, because mental health in my community just wasn't, you know, as understood.
But do you have friends, like, okay, so, because people could do this whether you're a therapist or not, but do you have friends who, because you're a therapist, they're like, okay, friend, I need to dump this, and I need your advice.
But those people probably aren't people I consider my like real friends. Like, they may not know that. Like, they may not understand that. But absolutely. Like, people I know that will be like, okay, listen to this. And, you know, so now, particularly being in a much more confident place in my career, I'm like, you know, this costs money. Like, this is, you know, people get paid to do this.
It costs money, and I'm also not at work, and I don't.
And I'm not at work, and I've been at work all day, and like don't have the capacity. And most times I'll like kind of stop somebody in their tracks and say, I will continue to listen, but just know that whatever I give in response would probably not be the thing that you're either expecting or what I would tell a client, because my mental battery is just drained. So I'm just going to respond in whatever natural way.
Do you think that do you have a lot of friends who are therapists.
Those folks I can trust a little more to
Yeah.
support me. Yeah.
Because now I'm wanting to know, like, group text, like
Hilarious.
and then also conversations of like, oh my gosh, y'all, okay, listen to this. Do y'all have that with each other? Okay,
100%.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's like the healthiest thing that you can do with a group of people who share your professional background?
I think so, because I think it allows us to, like you said, in a group text, somebody can just strike up a conversation. There's no like, how y'all doing today? Whatever. It's like, y'all.
Do you sometimes feel like that's better than therapy for you?
Sometimes, because they get it without me having to give background explanation to it. But then at the same time, those women are people too. And I recognize that many of them are wives, mothers, you know, employees. And so we try to, I think, you know, tread lightly on how much we dump on one another, because we know. But I think we also are much more courteous to one another. Whereas, you know, one of my friends who I met in grad school, and we're super, super close. She lives in Houston now. She left me here. Whenever I call her, when she picks up, I always stop by saying first, like, how are you doing today? Or, you know, are you at work today? And she works in a college setting right now, but she used to be a school counselor too. So she's worked.
Oh, wow.
She's run the gamut.
Is she a psychologist like you?
She's a LPC, so a licensed professional counselor. And so she, I always make sure that I start my conversation with her, because I am usually still calling her for like girl talk. Right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and so how do you distinguish the two when you are? I mean, because we've had plenty of conversations where I'm like, I have to remind you that like this isn't a therapy session, okay? I'm literally just venting to you.
This.
Yeah, I'm just telling you this. But like, how do you decipher between the two when you are both therapists?
Yeah,
how do you know what's girl talk and like now this has turned into a full blown
something else? I think with us, we're a little bit selfish in that we don't even ask that part.
Oh, okay.
We're just like, you know that you're my girl.
Yeah.
But you also know that if you have some like, you know, therapeutic advice, please give it. But also, I'm calling you because you're my girl.
Yeah.
And so I think that has been, you know, understood with some of my closer friendships with people who are also therapists.
Like, don't feel the pressure to do this, but feel the pressure.
Also feel the pressure, right?
Feel the pressure.
Please take all the pressure to give me the answer to what to do. Because that's the other thing too. You're going to call not in the, you know, the advice seeking phase, but to be like, Vic, tell me what to do. Like, tell me what to do. Not just like, oh yeah, listen, and have you thought about this? I'm like, no, I'm calling because I want you to tell me what to do. Correct.
So as you're in this space with athletes, and then you also have your private practice called Small Talk Counseling. And so I feel like you go through a lot of dumping, saving people's lives, like, you know, giving them hope in a lot of situations. And so do you ever leave these sessions or these situations feeling hopeless for yourself?
I think it depends on the scenario. There are definitely cases that I've had and clients and patients that I've had that, you know, speak to parts of myself that are like the little LaKeitha and, you know, and experiences that I've had. But even current things like working with I work mostly probably with millennials and now Gen Z too in the college space. But I'm a millennial. I'm an elderly millennial apparently, from what they say.
You on the cuff. I'm
right there, right? I'm like right there. But either way, it's like there are things though, particularly I work with a lot of women of color. And so the stories of things happening to them in the workplace or in their family life or related to like domestic violence, sexual assault. And those are the parts that for all intensive purposes, people who look at clinicians a lot of times I think they forget about that humanity too. Like, you know, I've been in terrible work environments before. I've been someone who has had sort of physical altercations violently towards me and like things like that no one gets to know until they are in my like inner circle or in my life. And I think that's okay because again, you're trained for it, you're equipped for it. But if you don't practice sort of your own self-care and like having to navigate that, you know, I'm 12 years into doing this. Like there are people who do this and I don't know how they do it, for like 30, 40, 50 years of being a therapist. and imagine the stories they've heard, imagine the burdens they've, bared, and imagine even the loss that they've had to have.
Read their books.
Yeah, you
I
read
will
the books.
almost always pick up a book if I know that it was written by a therapist.
Because there's a level of transparency that we learn to have.
And then there's a lot of like you that you can see in those stories that they've collected throughout the years. So when you're in those situations and you're feeling hopeless, obviously, people would think that you just have the language or that
to tell myself. I talk to myself.
Yeah, correct.
People say that all the time.
And so in those moments where you don't have the language for yourself, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a person of faith. So I definitely believe in being able to have spiritual practices that allow me to, dump or take my cares to a certain space for myself. I love to journal, so I'll prayer journal and kind of regular journal and bring those together to allow room for that. Yeah. And then
this is not a requirement to be on the network.
It is not, because a lot of people I know. It's a thing though. It is a
I'm
healthy
clearly drawn
tool.
to people who do this, but
it's a healthy tool, you know, and people can do it in their own ways. I think sometimes people always assume journaling is like dear diary, blah 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 blah. Whereas for some people it's drawing, some people it's like bullets, some people it's full out like narratives.
And for some people, it is all of the above.
All of the above. And so I love doing that. But I am someone that I like to just turn my brain off completely. So, I watch my fair share. I watch less of it now, but I used to watch my fair share of trash TV, reality shows.
Just to cut that part of your brain off.
I was just I would watch Love and Hip Hop Atlanta, back in the day. You know what I mean? But I don't know what's happening on it now. But those sort of shows helped me, as still probably tragic as some of them were, to not think about my client that I just saw 3 hours before, whose life to me is very real. And so I would find ways to just kind of check out. And so now for me, that's just watching movies or shows or reading books. I love to travel. So I'm, super grateful now that being in a place of, working for myself, where if I want to go, see somebody on tour for a book tour, I'm going to go see it and spend 48 hours in the city and then be back at work on Monday. And
and because you're this independent woman, you used to do this by yourself. And so
I don't have to ask anyone.
Now you don't have now you kind of do. You're not married, but there's still this sense of responsibility to okay, so what does that feel like? How long have you dated your boyfriend?
So
do you call him a boyfriend? I feel like as an adult.
Boyfriend.
Okay.
But to friends, I'll say man friend.
Okay.
Or
that's my man.
Yeah, the man.
My man.
So we have been together now for a year, and I'm gonna get this wrong. A year and 3 months, I think, close to that. So over a year. We have a very unique story. We met in elementary school back very, very young, and 20 years later reconnected. We were connected on social media and stuff like that, but that has just been the place where that kind of remained. And just, just like the kids say now, he just slid onto social media. And
he slid in your DMs?
He didn't even slide into the DMs. He wrote on a post publicly that friends and family started to see and were like, who is this man
this
writing?
Man say, ain't no secret, sis, I want you.
And the irony is that that's who he still is now, which is it's super sweet. That's who he is. And it makes so much sense now. I'm like, why would you do that? Because I would never do that, but it's him. And so it's been...
He is unashamed.
In every way. Yep.
Yeah, he was like, I want you. Ain't no sense in hiding in your DMs because I want these men to know too.
I want other people. I know. I feel like it was kind of a tactic.
I want these men to think that you are already mine.
And maybe it was a strategy. It might have been a strategy.
He's smart.
And at that point, I had stopped dating because dating got so terrible. In your 30s, it's just rough. And so it's just ironic that literally, I think earlier that year, I was like, I'm done with it. I'm just going to be like, the rich auntie, y'all's kids would be mine.
You were done. You didn't even think that your man was face planted at nobody's altar, praying for you. You just thought whatever.
I was like, he's not
rich
here.
auntie for life. Well, he's here.
He's NCAA.
Okay, so tell me about this man. Is he, because I've seen therapists be in some pretty tragic dating
relationships.
situations.
That's right.
And so, who? Do you feel like this is a man that is like, you can fully come home and not have to work on him? First of all, Claire, if you're a woman, you know you got to work on every man.
That's also kind of factual.
But do you feel like you can leave work at work and truly be like your soft self?
Yeah, I don't have to be on, right?
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about like, okay, now I got to go home to my second shift and
Right.
like figure out what, things he has going on that emotionally should be things that as an individual he should be taking care of. And so maybe there's a benefit to dating a little later in life and finding someone a little later in life because they've had time to do that the same way I have in different ways. And so I'm super grateful for that. I don't think I have ever had that in any relationship that I've had before. So it took me even a minute to get used to because I think Did
a part of you feel like he was janky because he was too good at it?
No, not janky. Maybe
I can't trust you because you're too good at this.
Yeah, but I'm a person as a whole that's slow to trust and slow to warm up. And like, so I remember on our first date being like, look, I'm trying to, be safe enough to be
Was
soft.
your first date in New Orleans?
It was in New Orleans.
Was it a group setting? You know what I'm asking you.
No, it wasn't. Okay. That would have been wild.
First of all, I'm so nosy that when he came with us, so we,
that was like our third date or so, and we all did that
good.
group thing.
Okay,
yeah.
so let me.
So you got to meet him earlier than some of my other friends.
Yeah, but I'm also
asked some important questions.
I'm also very nosy.
It's okay.
I was
invited
literally
you to eat. We went to
at
eat.
the table, like, is this your boyfriend?
When he went to the bathroom.
I was like, okay, because he's really nice. He is really nice. And so, no pressure, Jai, if you ever watch this. I know that you said that you wanted to be a mom. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be married? Like, is that like a dream of yours?
Yeah, I definitely want to be married. I'd love to be married first if I can, just because I know myself as an independent person. I need phases. Like I'm gonna need to be able to share space with somebody for a little bit and be able to figure out those tougher conversations that you have to have about space and needing time, needing my journal time, needing whatever.
And there's so much beauty in those phases. Like there's such a beautiful part of like dating your person for like a while, not too long, but dating them for a while and being like, okay, this is good. I could now move on into this next phase. And then like not even getting pregnant too soon right afterwards. Because you don't want pressure to just, because everything, work,
everything
school,
is pressure filled.
Everything is pressure to perform.
That's right. Even though I work in performance, which is wild, but
even
I don't want to do that in my personal
performance life. Yeah, you don't, and nobody wants to do that. Even though we haphazardly like walk ourselves into it, because I feel like you don't ever want your partner to feel like you're performing, or even your friends. Yeah. But at a certain point, you do have to show up sometimes when you're not feeling it.
That's right.
And that can sometimes feel like a performance. But the general, like, just being around you feels calming. Yeah. And it just feels good. I feel like I'm at peace.
And I need that because in day to day,
I love it.
You're so great.
I know I'm going to look back at this episode. I'm going to look so cheesy and be so mad at how I held my face. But I'm just so happy.
You will love it. I think it definitely shifts your perspective on life when you're able to, come home to peace. And we hear that a lot where like men will say, like, oh, I want peace in my house.
Yeah, as if they're the only people who deserve it.
Or who want it, right. And a lot of times it's almost like presumptive that like women wouldn't want that too, especially women who are career women and, have their own. So everybody wants peace. Like who doesn't? It's kind of weird.
Especially when you've been at such a place in your life where you've had to perform until you can feel comfortable enough to be yourself. You don't want to do that in your personal life.
No, it's exhausting.
Yeah. So then that's kind of a cheat code that you met him when you were a kid.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's like, who would have thought that
If I would have knew the girl next door would
He's
he probably did know that you were the girl next door. That's why he went hiding in your DMs.
I mess with him all the time, and I'm like, why didn't you ask me out in 5th grade?
He knew
4th
better.
grade?
He knew better.
Whatever.
He knew better. He probably knew that he was irresponsible in middle school, high school, and college. And he probably was smart enough to know, like, let me not squander this before my time.
You have to ask him.
Good. Good job. Good job that you waited. You waited your turn. I know I'm like jumping back this way, but as I'm talking about, like, we just talked about something that actually made me think about this. Having to like perform, right? Until you're able to just fully be yourself.
Yep.
You are a doctor named LaKeitha Poole with natural hair and beautiful brown skin, working in a space that doesn't always look like you.
Yeah.
So, walking into that space, did you ever feel like you needed to use an alias? Or were you comfortable showing up as LaKeitha Poole?
Never an alias, but I think I got comfortable, which a lot of people do, with letting people give you like nicknames and things like that.
Which was?
Like Lala or...
Is that a...
And so the irony is like...
Who gave you nicknames like Lala?
People in the workspaces.
Like the people who didn't look like us?
Correct. And so those...
Do you think that it just made them more comfortable?
Absolutely. That was literally what I was going to say. I was like, you learn as you get older, particularly in professional spaces, that's really about other people's discomfort with not wanting to, read and say like, my name's phonetic. So I tell people that all the time. I'm like, if you can read, you can say my name.
You can say my name.
There's no tricks to it.
No,
none of that. And
it's
so,
not LaKeitha.
Right.
It's literally spelled
Keith in the core of it. And I'm like, you got 2 letters in the front.
What's
and
your
an A
daddy's
at the
name,
end.
Keith?
His middle name's Keith.
Okay.
Yep. His first name's Larry. So, and then my mom's name's Amanda.
What?
There we go.
Wow. Wow, I love that.
So,
baby, we are some creative people.
Oh, yeah. We come up with the things, okay?
Okay, so when you were interviewing at LSU, you show up as Dr. LaKeitha. Were you Dr. LaKeitha when you first?
I was for LSU for athletics, yes.
Okay, so that puts a little bit more respect on your name.
Yeah.
When I come, my name is Dr., but my name is LaKeitha, but you know that I come with some substance.
Yeah.
And so, what about your hair? Did you show up?
I intentionally wore my hair in a twist out, so big fro, to that interview. That was my first professional interview with having my doctorate.
Yeah.
And going to a new job because I wanted them to know who might show up every day. I needed them to know.
I love that.
Some days I would have that hair. Some days I'd have braids. Some days I'd have faux locks. Some days I'm having.
Most days I won't have straight hair.
Yeah, most days I won't because we live in South Louisiana.
Correct. And I'm natural.
And so it was important for me, and I made that conscious decision, and I've also given that advice to lots of my mentees in this space where I'm like, show up as the whole person that feels like, they will get on the job, not just in your intelligence and your book knowledge, but who's gonna walk in the door.
Have you ever seen, I call it the Black Cinderella, but it's the
one with Brandy?
Rodgers and Hammerstein.
With Brandy and Whitney Houston.
Yes. Okay, so there's a part in there where she's like, she's teaching her daughters, you remember, you don't show who you are until after the wedding. And so that's one of my favorite movies. And I think about that in professional spaces too, where people are literally not showing who they actually are until after they've gotten the job. And then sometimes by then it's too late because then you're in these government positions and they can't easily fire you.
Yep.
And so is this something that has always been true to you, or have you learned over time that if I just show up as LaKeitha, they're either gonna like me today, right? And I'm gonna continue to grow on them, or I'm gonna show up as Lala.
Which doesn't even sound like me, but
No. Or I'm gonna show up as Lala and they're gonna like me now, and then be hella confused when I show up as LaKeitha. Yeah, when I show up as LaKeitha.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like over time in the entirety of my career, I've made adjustments where I'm much more in tune with helping people to understand, like, no, you should say my whole name, right? Or, you know, and even in spaces like, you know, having a PhD, sometimes I'll be in a room, I work in the medical part of our department. Every male always gets called doctor, last name, right? I can often get referred to just as LaKeitha, not even like Dr. LaKeitha. And
I know you lying.
I know, and I know you always hate when we've gone places.
I know.
And
I never
you will
introduce
me. You do, no matter who it is, you introduce me always as Dr. LaKeitha Poole.
Well, because I think it's important. And I grew up, and I say this all the time, I went to an all-black elementary school, went to an all-black middle school, high school, and I graduated from an HBCU. And so when you meet doctors in those spaces, first of all, most doctors are not even as humble as you are. They're like...
they tell you to call them that.
Yeah, I'm not Miss nothing. I am Dr. such and such, right? But that's important because you've worked hard for that.
Sure.
And to your point, you've worked harder for this because you are Black and your name is LaKeitha and you do have brown skin and natural hair from the lower 9. And so it's like this whole life of having to like prove who you are to people, and it's like, I'm done proving. This is who I am. This is what I work for. And so, you know, whenever I'm around people, even when you're not around me, I'm like, yeah, my friend Dr. Poole. And sometimes I call you Dr. LaKeitha depending on who I'm talking to, but for the most part, it's Dr.
You always
Poole. Put some respect on your name.
Yeah.
That's what I be telling the people. Listen.
Well, and I appreciate that because in a lot of professional settings, that is still a battle.
I just can't even believe that.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a real
Is
thing.
it doctors calling you back or just anybody?
It's usually just anybody. And that's, you know, because at a certain level...
It's even crazier that they never even met you as LaKeitha. Like, they've only known you as Dr.
Right, and so I have, you know, mentors and friends. And my mom is actually the one who really, because she's so proud, but she's always like, what did they say? Like, she'll, you know, in the middle of something, she's like, they didn't put the whole thing on there. And so, and my family, who's super proud, like, it could be my name written in to do something for the family reunion, they're going to put the doctor in front because they feel like that's such a huge accomplishment. And it is, like, you know, and so I think being able to make sure
graduating
I'm doing that
from undergrad is a big deal, right? Getting your master's is a big deal. So why would
this be?
Why would this not be? I mean, I've met people who have like master's degrees in the entire alphabet behind their name. And some of them want you to call them by all those alphabets behind their name. And so, you know, I have a couple of friends who are doctors and they're humble just like you. And they're like, oh, girl, my name is just, and I'm like, not in public, it's not.
You're like, not to this person. To me, okay. If you're giving me permission, cool.
And while we're at dinner, cool. But outside of this, in mixed company, you are who you are.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate, like, you know,
meet people like that though.
Yeah, you definitely do. Sometimes to remind you of who you are. Because we can get so caught up in our spaces and what we're doing and that just being whatever.
Like whatever. We dim our own light sometimes related to some of that stuff, thinking, you know, it's too much for people. Or
Which brings me to my next point. And this is how we're going to close this out today. Little LaKeitha. In hindsight, what is something that you would tell her today that nobody has ever told her?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think that you're always good enough in every form. So from schooling to sports to being now an entrepreneur and all those things, with or without what feels like the expected tools, you will still be good enough and you will figure it out. And that it will still be okay. Like it will turn out fine. And so I think a lot of times I had people maybe reminding me of that in action, like my grandmother, my mom being present, being supportive. But as a only child, hyper independent, oftentimes people would forget that those words sometimes are needed. And so I think I would just definitely tell her, like, it will be okay. You will figure this out. And it'll be probably more than you even dreamed it would be. It definitely has.
Yay. And so also, I'm not done. That was just a really good answer. And then also, what's your advice for young women right now who may see you and they only get to view you from the lens of the success that you've been able to occur all of these years, what's some advice that you would give them in their hard moments?
Make sure that you are like catering to that little version of yourself still, who loved maybe the simplistic things and know the things that bring you joy, know what you need to do to restore yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. Leave room for grace. That's one of my favorite words. It's just being able to offer grace the same way we do to other people, to ourselves. And oftentimes we are, dreaming about the self-love and the self-care that we give to other people, when in actuality we should be giving that to ourselves. And I just would encourage them to be your full self, show up big and loud and, with your full hair and whatever you want, like be who you are at all times. So that you don't have to ever feel like, there's a moment where you're having to contemplate if you belong in that room, because you started out there as yourself. And no matter how the room around you changes, you're still always going to be, the center of that room. And, I think have a little swag about it. Like walk in like that's where you belong, because you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Walk in purpose.
Walk
beyond
in purpose.
that fear.
Walk in purpose.
Oh, I love that. What's next for you?
So Small Talk is growing and moving and shaking. And so I definitely want it to keep going in that direction. My dream within the next year or two would to have a location, in addition to our Baton Rouge location, one in New Orleans, because that's my heart.
Yeah.
And just continue to figure out how to touch as many lives as we can. Mental health is still a pretty stigmatized space. And so I think we've done a good job in Baton Rouge helping to spread the message of all the ways that you can utilize mental health that doesn't just look like the traditional sitting on a sofa, I got a clipboard and that sort of thing. Right. And so I would love to do that in different places. I love writing, so at some point I will probably write books and around different topics related to wellness and mental health and doing
I will
that
have
stuff.
them all.
You will have them all. Even if I didn't have my name on them, they were written by a therapist, because you would know. And really just to keep seeing what other opportunities come, more in the sport and mental performance world as well. So, like I said, I had the time of my life getting to work with the Warriors, but every single day I get to show up at LSU and work with champions too.
Also, Warriors, I think that y'all should know, because somebody from the Warriors gonna watch this, duh. If y'all lose this year, you do know it's because she is not with you.
This is gonna end up on SportsCenter.
You remember when I tell y'all that if you lost, well, clearly you know the antidote.
That's hilarious.
Okay, so tell the Curate Network and anyone who has not had the privilege or the honor of meeting you, how do we get in touch with you, or how do we seek therapy at Small Talk? Give us all that information.
So you can go to our website, which is www.smalltalkcounseling.com. We are on social media, but I am not great at that, and which is why, as we're growing, I got to get support and help with that. But we're on like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all under Small Talk Counseling. And then I've tried to do a better job of logging my experiences through Instagram. So if you just want to learn more about me and what that looks like, my Instagram is at LaKeitha P, because I'm always going to be LaKeitha, like we were talking about. And so you can also follow my journey there a little bit. I put a lot about what I do with teams, but also a lot related to mental health and just balance in life and womanhood. So find me there.
And if you guys are ever interested in a really good, intimate book club, you can also find her at...
This is why you have friends.
The Emerald Couch. Okay.
The Emerald Couch Book Club, which is an initiative of Small Talk, and it's our virtual book club space. But we are here if you want to join us in person. For it, we do one book a quarter, so that it's not super overwhelming. There's still time to join for July, because this will go out before July. You guys will see this. And so but you can join anytime, and it's really great because it allows we usually have people from all over the country that have been a part of it. So that's another great way, again, through therapy, bibliotherapy, that you can get some mental health support and learn more about what do you need to take care of yourself.
Don't y'all love her? Okay, so thank y'all so much for tuning in to the Curate for Women Network. If this is your first time here, thank you. I hope that I hope something that we've said or shared has helped you grow in any capacity, heal, laugh, all the things. Thank you so much for doing this with me. And we will see y'all next time. Bye.